Hi friends, this is Sumiti Ahuja. I'm working as Assistant Professor with Amity Law School, Noida, Amity University, Uttar Pradesh. The module which I'll be dealing with in this presentation is titled as cheating, which is an offence against property under the Indian Penal Code, under the paper Fundamentals of Crime, Criminal Law and Criminal Justice. To start with the learning outcomes, after completing this module, the reader will be able to articulate and discuss the statutory framework related to the offence of cheating. The reader will be able to understand the difference between fraudulently and dishonestly as mental elements. The reader will be able to appraise the value of relevant case laws and illustrations in gaining in-depth knowledge of the concepts. The reader will be able to differentiate between cheating and other offences related to property. Now moving on to the contents of the module, I'll give a gist of or the synopsis of the module. Firstly, introduction, a brief introduction to the offence of cheating, followed by the offence of cheating as it has been dealt with under the Indian Penal Code. Moving on to the offence of cheating as differentiated from various other offences against property under the Indian Penal Code, followed by difference between Indian law and English law on cheating. Then at the end of this presentation, I will be giving a brief summary of the entire module. To start with an introduction to the offence of cheating, cheating as an offence under the Indian Penal Code 1860 finds its place in sections 415 to 420 under chapter 17, which is titled as Offences Against Property under the Indian Penal Code. Here I will be quoting the authors of the Indian Penal Code who, while defining the ambit of the offence of cheating, had observed that, and I quote, "We propose to make it cheating to obtain property by deception in all cases where the property is fraudulently obtained. We propose to punish as guilty of cheating a man who by false representations obtains a loan of money, not meaning to repay it, a man who by false representations obtains an advance of money, not meaning to perform the service or to deliver the article for which the advance is given. In all these cases, there is deception. In all, the deceiver's object is fraudulent. There are infractions of a legal right effected by deliberate dishonesty." Now, I'll move on to the offence of cheating as it has been dealt with under the Indian Penal Code. To start with a brief statutory framework of this offence, offence of cheating has been defined under section 415 of the Indian Penal Code, followed by its punishment under section 417. The aggravated forms of the offence of cheating have been stated under sections 416, 418 and 420 of the IPC. Then cheating by personation, which is the most common form of cheating, has been given under section 416, read with section 419. Then cheating with knowledge that wrongful loss may ensue to the person whose interest the offender is bound to protect under section 418, followed by cheating and dishonestly inducing delivery of property, which is stated under section 420 of the Indian Penal Code. Now, to start with the offence or the essentials of the offence of cheating under the Indian Penal Code, which has been given under section 415, this definition of cheating under section 415 IPC has been divided into two parts. Part 1 states, deceiving and fraudulently or dishonestly inducing the person so deceived to deliver any property to any person. Secondly, or to consent that any person shall retain any property. Part 2 of this definition deals with deceiving and intentionally inducing the person so deceived to do or omit to do anything which he would not do or omit if he were not so deceived, and which act or omission causes or is likely to cause damage or harm to that person in body, mind, reputation or property. Now, if I deal with or if I briefly highlight the observation of Supreme Court on section 415 IPC, here I'll say that the Supreme Court has time and again reiterated the point that the offence of cheating under section 415 consists of two separate classes, as I mentioned earlier. two separate classes of acts which the person deceived can be induced to do. In the first place, he may be induced either fraudulently or dishonestly to deliver any property to any person. In the second class of acts, doing or omitting to do anything which the person deceived would not do or omit to do if he were not so deceived. Now, in the first class of cases, the inducing must be fraudulent or dishonest. The term or highlights that it has to be either fraudulently done or dishonestly done. So, the term or acts as a disjunctive here. In the second classes of acts, the inducing must be intentional but not fraudulent or dishonest. The same was also observed in the case of Arun Bhandari versus State of Uttar Pradesh, 2013, Volume 2, SEC 801. Now, if we go through again both the classes of acts or both the parts of the definition under section 415, we can make out that deception and inducement are common to both the parts of this section. Only difference lies in the mental elements, that is, in part 1 it's either fraudulently or dishonestly, in the second part it's intentional. Now, moving on or highlighting the essential ingredients of cheating under the Indian Penal Code, I'll start with the first or the foremost essential, that is deception. It is the first stage to establish offense of cheating. Now, to deceive exactly means to mislead someone or to make that person believe something which you know, which you are well aware is not true. It is causing to believe what is false or misleading as to a matter of fact or leading into an error. We need to understand this fact that innocent representation is no deception, which means if I believe that those words are true or that fact is true, but in reality it is false, and still I make that representation from my side, it is an innocent representation and hence it is no deception. Now, explanation to section 415 provides that dishonest concealment of facts is also deception. For example, A sells and conveys an estate to B. Now, A, knowing that in consequence of such sale, he has no right to the property because obviously he has sold that property. Now, he further moves on to sell or mortgage the property second time to Z without disclosing the fact of the previous sale and conveyance to B, and receives the purchase or mortgage money from Z. Now, in this case, A will be held liable for cheating for the non-disclosure of facts of the previous sale. Now, what amounts to deception is a matter of evidence and it depends on facts and circumstances of each case. The pretense need not necessarily be made by words, that is, words which are spoken or written. It may also be gathered from the acts and conduct of the party. Say if we consider two situations here. Now, in situation A, a person by falsely pretending to be in the civil service or being a civil servant intentionally deceives Z and thus dishonestly induces Z to let him have on credit certain goods for which he does not mean to pay. Now, in situation B, A by putting a counterfeit mark on an article intentionally deceives Z into a belief that this article was made by a certain celebrity manufacturer and thus dishonestly induces Z to buy and pay for the article. Now, in situation A, the person has deceived by making false pretenses through words, that is by telling the other person that he is a civil servant, whereas in situation B, in contrast to the previous situation, it is by the deception is by false pretenses, which is through the conduct of putting a counterfeit mark on the article. Moving on to the second essential of this definition, which is fraudulently or dishonestly induces the person so deceived. Now, the prosecution here has to prove that the inducement was caused by deception which was exercised by the offender. Now, the term inducement refers to when the misleading facts which are given by the offender, they are believed by the person so deceived. Now, it is important for the application of this section that the intention to deceive should have existed at the time of the inducement itself. The first part of section 415 makes it necessary that the deception by the accused of the person deceived must be either fraudulent or dishonest. Further, such deception must induce the person deceived to either, firstly, deliver the property to any person, or secondly, consent that any person shall retain any property which he was having beforehand. Say for example, A, by exhibiting to Z a false sample of an article, intentionally deceives Z into believing that the article corresponds with the sample and thereby dishonestly induces Z to buy and pay for the article. Now A cheats here. Now what I would like to highlight here is the definition or explanation, or rather elaborating the two terms fraudulently and dishonestly here. To start with fraudulently first, section 25 of the IPC defines the term fraudulently, and it states a person is said to do a thing fraudulently if he does that thing with an intent to defraud but not otherwise. Black's Law Dictionary, which again is a celebrity legal dictionary quoted in many judgments, it has defined intent to defraud as intent to defraud means an intention to deceive another person and to induce such other person in reliance upon such deception to either assume, create, transfer, alter or terminate a right, obligation or power with reference to a property. Now fraud is committed if any advantage is expected to the person who causes the deceit. Now moving on to the second term, that is dishonestly. Section 24 of the Indian Penal Code defines the term dishonestly, and it states, and I quote, whoever does anything with the intention of causing wrongful gain to one person or wrongful loss to another person is said to do that thing dishonestly. Now section 23, which is the immediately previous section to 24, defines as to what exactly we mean by wrongful gain and wrongful loss. It defines wrongful gain as any gain by unlawful means of property to which the person gaining is not legally entitled, and wrongful loss as the loss by unlawful means of property to which the person losing it is legally entitled. Now it is not necessary for the purpose of proving dishonestly that both wrongful gain and wrongful loss should exist. Existence of either can suffice, reason being that the term used is, or the phrase is, wrongful gain or wrongful loss, so the term or has to be read as a disjunctive. Now here I will be highlighting a very interesting article by Henry T. Terry, which was published in Yale Law Journal in 1915, which is titled as Intent to Defraud itself. Now Henry T. Terry, in his article titled Intent to Defraud, he states that intent to defraud is made up of certain elements like A, intent to make a representation to convey an idea to another. Second, or B, intent to address or direct the representation to someone. C, intent that representation bears specific meaning which may be assertion of a certain fact. D, person making representation has knowledge about the falsity of the representation. E, intent that the person to whom such representation is addressed believes in it. F, intent that he shall act upon it in a certain way. G, intent that his so acting upon it shall produce a particular consequence. Now the author clearly mentions in his article itself that situations A to E, they provide for elements that constitute intent to deceive, and the differentiating element is element F and G, which through their addition amounts to intent to defraud. Now Henry Terry, while distinguishing between intent to deceive and intent to defraud, observes that is intent to defraud which is culpable, that is which is being capable of punishment, and intent to deceive is not legally wrongful. Now intent to defraud thus is made of two things. First is deceit and second injury. Now injury need not be pecuniary always. Chief Justice White, in a judgment Kotam Raju Venkat Raidu versus Emperor, explained intent to defraud through this example. He stated that A tells B a lie and B believes him. Now B is deceived, but it does not follow that A intended to defraud B. But as it seems to me, if A tells B a lie, intending that B should do something in return, which A conceives to be to his own benefit or advantage, and which if done would be to the loss or detriment of B, A intends here to defraud B. Now, moving on to the third essential of section 415, definition of cheating, which is intentionally inducing that person to do or omit to do anything. The following things are required to be proved by the prosecution here. Firstly, that the accused deceived some person and thereby induced him. Secondly, such inducement was intentional. Thirdly, the person so induced he did or he either abstained from doing or omitted to do something he would not have done or omitted to do something if he wasn't so induced, and such act or omission caused or was likely to cause damage or harm to the person induced in either body, mind, reputation or property. Now, second part of the definition under section 415 does not involve fraud or dishonesty and is therefore leniently punished as in comparison to the first part. By this part, intentional deceptions are punished provided they cause or are likely to cause any damage or harm. Now, if I quote an example here, A is induced by deception to buy shares in a company or invest money in certain government securities at a price above the fair market price. The person who intentionally deceives him is neither the seller of nor interested in the shares. Even then, the deceiver will be held liable for cheating, reason being that he deceived and thereby intentionally induced A to buy shares above the fair market price. A bought the shares in a company as a result of that inducement. A would not have purchased the shares in absence of such inducement, and such act caused damage to A. Now here I would like to state an observation, rather an important observation, that it has been observed that cheating in the second form has some peculiarity which lies in the damage being caused by the person deceived to himself. Indirectly it may be the damage, it may be that the damage is to result from the deceit, but immediately it is to result from the induced act of the person deceived. The term injury as defined in section 44 of the code as any harm whatever illegally caused to any person in body, mind, reputation or property was not employed in section 415. Now, act or omission caused or was likely to cause damage or harm to the person induced is a part of part 2 of this definition, which means the damage must be direct, probable or a natural consequence of the induced act. The person deceived must have acted under influence of the deceit, and the damage must not be too remote. The term cause under section 415 signifies a direct and proximate causal connection between the act or the omission and the damage or the harm which is caused to the victim. Now, punishment for the offence of cheating, which is stated under 415, is given under section 417, which is maximum imprisonment, which may extend to 1 year, or fine, or both. Now, I'll move on to the next part of this presentation, which deals with specific or aggravated forms of cheating. To start with, cheating by personation. One of the aggravated forms is cheating by personation, given under section 416, read with section 419. Then, cheating with the other aggravated form is cheating with knowledge that wrongful loss may ensue to the person whose interest the offender is bound to protect, that is section 418. And then the last aggravated form is cheating and dishonestly inducing delivery of property. I'll start with cheating by personation, which is given under section 416. The term personate here means to pretend to be a particular person. It is when one person claims to be another person and thereby causes some act to be done which would otherwise have not been done. Personation under this section is by either pretending to be some other person, or knowingly substituting one person for another, or representing that the offender, that he or any other person is a person other than he or such other person in reality is. Now, under this section, a person commits cheating by pretending to be some other person. That person can be real or imaginary. Now, example if I quote here, false representation as to caste, marital status, economic status, holding of some office, etc. would be covered here. Now, section 419 lays down the punishment for this offence of cheating by personation, that is maximum 3 years or fine or both. Similarly, under IPC itself, there is one more section, that is section 170, which provides for punishment in case of personating a public servant. Now, section 170 states that whoever pretends to hold any particular office as a public servant, knowing that he does not hold such office or falsely personates any other person holding such office, and in such assumed character he does or attempts to do any act under colour of such office, he shall be punished with an imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 2 years, or with fine, or both. Now, I'll move on to the next aggravated form of cheating, offence of cheating under IPC, which is given under section 418, which is titled as cheating one whom the accused was bound to protect. Now, this section punishes cheating with knowledge that wrongful loss may ensue to person whose interest the offender is bound to protect. Punishment laid down is maximum imprisonment of 3 years or fine or both. Now, this section applies to cases of cheating by guardians, by trustees, bankers, solicitors, agents, manager of Hindu family, directors or manager of a company in fraud of the shareholders. Now, this particular section is considered to be, it is more severely punished. Reason is the fact that in this particular case, there is an abuse of trust that is taken care of through severe punishment. Now, if we talk about the essentials of this particular section, firstly, the offender cheated a person whose interest he was under a legal obligation to protect, or under a contract he was bound to protect. Secondly, or the second essential, that the offender had the knowledge that he was likely to cause wrongful loss to such person. Now, we need to take care, or we need to understand that the deception must not only be intentional, but it also has to be coupled with knowledge that it is likely to cause a wrongful loss thereby. Now, if I move on to the next aggravated form of cheating, which is given under section 420 of the IPC and is titled as cheating and dishonestly inducing delivery of property. Now, a person injured, in this case, a person injured is made to part with his property, acting on a representation which was false to the knowledge of the accused, and the accused has dishonest intention from the outset itself. Now, section 420 IPC deals with such cases of cheating whereby the deceived person is dishonestly induced to deliver any property to any person, or to make, alter or destroy the whole or any part of the valuable security, or anything which is signed or sealed and is capable of being converted into a valuable security. Now, section 30 of the Indian Penal Code 1860 defines the term valuable security. Now, this section, that is section 420 of the IPC, extends its applicability to those cases of cheating which involve either delivery of property or destruction of valuable security. Now, the foremost essential for holding a person liable under this section is that there has to be a dishonest intention from the very beginning. It is a sine qua non for liability under this offence. Now, I'll state an example here. A intentionally deceives Z into a belief that A means to deliver to Z a certain quantity of indigo plant which he does not intend to deliver, and thereby dishonestly induces Z to advance certain money to him upon the faith of such delivery which he has promised. Now, herein A cheats. But if A at the time of obtaining the money intends to deliver the indigo plant and afterwards breaks his contract and does not deliver it, he does not cheat but is liable only to a civil action for breach of contract. Now, in this example, in the first part, A is liable for cheating under section 420 because he had a dishonest intention of not paying since the very inception when he had promised that payment in lieu of the indigo plant. Whereas in the second part, it can be clearly seen that A had the intention to fulfill his part of the contract in the beginning, but later he could not, so in that case it amounts to civil wrong and civil liability for breach of contract will accrue to him. Now, I would like to give the observations from certain case laws pertaining to section 420. To quote here, Mahadev Prasad versus State of West Bengal, AIR 1954, Supreme Court 724, wherein it was observed by the Supreme Court that from mere fact that the person who made a promise could not keep it, it cannot lead to a presumption that he all along had a culpable intention to break the promise from the beginning. One more case here, if I quote, that is Shri BSS VV Vishwanand Maharaj versus State of AP. Citation is AIR 1999, Supreme Court 2332, wherein it was held that if a person makes false representations as to his divine powers of healing and thereby induces a person to deliver money in exchange of cure through those healing powers, the person so inducing will be held liable for cheating under section 415 read with 420 of IPC. And it was also held in case of Abhyanand Mishra versus State of Bihar, AIR 1961, Supreme Court 1698, that is, the term property for the purpose of cheating need not necessarily have any market value or any monetary value as a necessity of this section, for this section. Now, it is possible that a thing which has no value in the hands of person cheated is of immense value to the person who has cheated, which were actually the facts of Abhyanand Mishra's case. Now, there are also many cases pertaining to section 420 which deals with dishonor of checks, that is an offence under section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act 1881 and also section 420 of the IPC. It has been held that these two sections are entirely different. Now, why they are entirely different? Supreme Court has also made a point here that it held that overlapping is possible in these offences, but they are entirely different from each other. Now, mens rea not being an essential requirement under section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act, it necessarily has to be proved by the prosecution for conviction under section 420 IPC, the latter therefore being a rather serious offence. Now, if I quickly bring out the point of differences between cheating and other offences against property, to start with theft. In theft, there is dishonest intention to take a movable property out of the possession of another person without his consent, whereas in cheating, it may be any form of property, movable or immovable. Here, the deceived person is fraudulently or dishonestly induced to deliver any property. Now, differentiating cheating from extortion, in words of Lord Macaulay, the offence of cheating must, like that of extortion, be committed by the wrongful obtaining of a consent. The difference lies in the fact that the extortioner obtains the consent by intimidation and in cheating by deception. Now, in extortion, consent is obtained by fear of injury, whereas in cheating, consent is obtained through false representations. Now, differentiating cheating from criminal misappropriation. In cheating, like criminal misappropriation, there is wrongful loss or wrongful gain. In cheating, the victim is induced to deliver the property, whereas in misappropriation, the offender is already from the very beginning in possession of the property, maybe innocently or by chance, and it is after that he develops a dishonest intention. Now, in criminal misappropriation, movable property is involved, whereas in cheating, it can be any property. Now, differentiating criminal breach of trust from cheating. In criminal breach of trust, the person receives property legally through entrustment and thereafter he retains it or converts it unlawfully. In cheating, dishonest intention starts with very inception of transaction. In breach of trust, there is existence of fiduciary relationship between owner and offender, whereas in cheating, except for section 418, no such fiduciary relationship exists. Now, difference between Indian law and English law on cheating, if I quote here, under English law, till 2006, the Theft Act of 1968 governed the law relating to obtaining property by deception. It provided for punishment to whosoever dishonestly obtained another's property by deception with the intention of permanently depriving that person of his property. This intention to deprive permanently, though, is not an ingredient of the Indian law. The provisions related to obtaining property by deception under Theft Act 1968 have now been replaced by the Fraud Act of 2006. Now, the terminology used in both the laws, English law and Indian law, is different. In India, the criminal law makes cheating an offence, fraud being a part of it. The usage of the word we can see fraudulently in the definition of cheating lies under section 415, whereas under English law, fraud in itself is punishable. To defraud or to do something fraudulently is not by itself made an offence under the Indian Penal Code. But various acts, when done fraudulently or dishonestly, as the sections say, are made offences. Now, I'll quickly summarize the entire presentation through few points. To start with, offence of cheating is discussed under sections 415 to 420 IPC and involves tricking a person and making him either deliver a property or make him to do or omit to do something which he wouldn't have if he would not have been tricked. Now, definition of cheating under section 415 is divided into two parts. First part punishes fraudulent or dishonest inducement that leads to either delivery of property by victim or giving of consent to retain any property, whereas the second part punishes intentional inducement, thereby making a person to do or omit to do something which he wouldn't have if not induced. The common factor between both the parts is deception and inducement. Deception means to mislead or to make false representations knowingly. Even non-disclosure of relevant facts is deception. Inducement means making a person believe and act upon false representations. Intention to deceive should exist from the beginning of a transaction, otherwise it will not amount to cheating and the person will only incur civil liability. Section 417 provides for punishment for cheating, which is maximum imprisonment of 1 year or fine or both. Offence of cheating need not necessarily relate to property. It can also partake nature of personation. Cheating by personation means to cheat a person by pretending to be or representing oneself to be someone that one isn't. Section 418 provides for punishment in case where a person existing in fiduciary relationship with a victim commits cheating against him. Section 420 is the strictest of all in terms of punishment. When it comes to the difference between cheating and other offences against property, the major difference lies in the element of deception. I hereby conclude my presentation. Thank you all for watching this presentation. Hope it was fruitful to you.